Hi guys, I'm gonna be reading volume 2, chapter 19. Let's start now. Had Elizabeth's opinion been all drawn from her own family, she could not have formed a very pleasing picture of a conjugal facility of or domestic comfort. Her father, cultivated by youth and beauty, and that appearance of good ma- humor which young and beautiful generally give, had married a woman whose weak understanding and illiberal mind had very early in their marriage put an end to all the real affection for her. Respect, esteem, and confidence had vanished forever, and all his views of domestic happiness were overthrown. By Mr. Bennet was now offered the position to seek comfort for the disappointment which his own imprudence had brought on. In any of those pleasures which too often console the unfortunate for their folly or their vice, he was fond of the country and of books, and from these tastes had arisen his principal enjoyment. To his wife he was a little otherwise indebted than her ignorance and folly had contributed to his amusement. This is not the sort of happiness which a man would in general wish to owe to his wife, but which other powers of entertainment are wanting. The true philosopher would derive benefit from such as are given. Elizabeth, however, had never been blind to the purse and property of her father's behavior as a husband. She had always seen it with pain, but respecting his ability and grateful for his affectionate treatment of herself, she endeavored to forget what she could not overlook and to banish from her thoughts that continual breach of conjugal obligation and decorum which in exposing his wife to the contempt of her own children was so highly repent, how, reprehensible, but she had never felt so strongly as now the disadvantage which must attend the children of so unsuitable a marriage. None ever been so fully aware of the evil arising from so ill judged a direction of talent which rightfully used might at least last have preserved the respectability of his daughter, even if incapable of enlarging the mind of his wife. When Elizabeth had rejoiced over Wakeham's det- departure, she found little other cause for satisfaction in the loss of the regiment. Their parties abroad was less varied than before, and at home she had a mother and a sister whose constant repinings at the dullness of everything around them threw a real gloom over their domestic cycle, and though Katie might in time regain her natural degree of sense since the disturbance of her brain were removed, her other sister, from whose deposition greater evil might be apprehended, was likely to be hardened in all her folly and assurance by a situation of such double danger as watering place and account. Upon the whole, therefore, she found what had been sometimes found before, that an event to which she had looked forward with impatient desire did not in taking place bring all the satisfaction she had promised herself. It was coincidence, absolutely necessary to name some of other period for the commencement of actual felicity, to have some other point on which her wishes and hope might be fixed, but again enjoying the pleasure of anticipation, console herself for the present, and prepare for another disappointment. Her tour to the lakes was now the object of her happiest thoughts. It was her best consolation for all the uncomfortable hours which this contentedness of her mother and Katie made inevitable. And could she have included Jane in the scheme, every part would have been perfect. But it's unfortunate, thought she, that I have something to wish for. Were the whole arrangement complete, my disappointment would be certain. But here, by carrying with me one of the ceaseless source of regret in my sister's absence, I may reasonably hope to have all my expectation of pleasure realized, a scheme of which every part promises delight can never be successful. General disappointment is only warded off by the defense of some little particular vexation. When Lydia went away, she promised to write every often and every minutely to her mother and no, when Lydia went away, she promised to write every often and every minutely to her mother and Kitty, but her letters were always long expected and always very short. Those to her mother contained little thing that that they were just returned from the library where such and such officers had attended them and where she had seen such beautiful ornaments as made her quite wild, and that she had a new gown and a new parasol, which she would have described more fully, and was obliged to leave off a violent hurry. As Mrs. Foster called her, they were going to the camp, and from her correspondence with her sister, there was still less to be learnt, and for her letters to Kitty, though rather longer, were much too full of line and other words to be public. After the first fortnight or 3 weeks of her absence, health, good humour, and cheerfully began to reappear at Longbourn. Everything won a happy aspect. The families who had been in town for the winter came back again, and summer fanry and summer engagement arose. Mrs. Bennet was restored to her usual, let me look up this word, querulous serenity, and by the middle of June, Katy was so much recovered as to be able to enter Meryton without tears, an event of such happy promise as to make Elizabeth hope that by the following Christmas she might be so tolerably reasonable as not to mention an officer above once a day, unless by some cruel and malicious arrangement at the War Office another regiment must be should be quartered in Meryton. The time fixed for the beginning of their northern tour was now fast approaching, and a fortnight only was wanting of it. And when a letter arrived from Mrs. Gardiner, which at once delayed its commencement and curtailed its extent, Mr. Gardner would be prevented by business from setting out till a fortnight later in July, and must be in London again within a month, and as that left too short a period for them to go so far, and to see so much as they had proposed, or at least to see it with the lecture and comfort they had built on, they were obliged to give up the lakes and substitute a more constructed tour, and according to the present plan, they were to go no further northward than Derbyshire. In that county, there was enough to be seen occupy occupy the chief of their 3 weeks, and to Mrs. Garner it had particularly strong attraction, the town where she had formerly passed some years of her life, where they were now to spend a few days, was probably as great as an object of her curiosity as all the celebrated beauties of Matlock, Chatsworth, Dovedale, Dove- Dovedale, and all the Peak. Elizabeth was excessively disappointed. She had set her heart on seeing the lakes, and still thought there might have been time enough. But it was her business to be satisfied, and certainly her temper to be happy, and all was soon right again. With the mention of Derbyshire, there were many ideas connected. It was impossible for her to see the world without thinking of Pemberley and its owner. But surely, said she, I may enter his county with impunity, and rob it of a few petrified spear without his perceiving me. The period of expectation was now doubled. 4 weeks were to pass away before her uncle and auntie's arrival, but they did pass away, and Mr. and Mrs. Gardner, with their 4 children, did at length appear at Longbourn. The children, 2 girls of 6 and 8 years old. The 2 younger boys were to be left under the particular care of their cousin Jane, who was the general favourite, and whose steady sense and sweetness of temper exactly adapted her for attending to her in every way, teaching them, playing with them, and loving them. The gardeners, look at this word, stayed only one night at Longbourn, and set off the next morning with Elizabeth in pursuit of novelty and amusement. One enjoyment was certain, that of suitableness as companions, a suitableness which comprehended health and temper to bear inconveniences, cheerfulness to enhance every pleasure, and affection and intelligence which might supply it among themselves if there were disappointment abroad. It, it is not the object of this work to give a description of Derbyshire, none of any of the remarkable places through which their routine thither lay. Oxford, Bellingham, Warwick, Kenilworth, De- Benham, are significantly known. A small part of Derbyshire is of present concern to the little town of Lambton, the scene of Mrs. Gardner's former residence, and where she had lately learned that some coincidence still remained. They bent their steps after having seen all the principal wonders of the country, and within 5 miles of Lambton, Elizabeth found from her aunt that Pemberley was situated. It was not in their direct road, none more than a mile or two out of it. In taking over their route the evening before, Mrs. Gardner expressed an inclination to see the place again. Mr. Gardner declared his willingness, and Elizabeth was applied to for her approbation. My love, should not you like to see a place of which you have heard so much? Said her aunt. A place to which so many of your acquaintances are connected. Wickham passed all his youth there, you know. Elizabeth was distressed. She felt that she had no business at Pemberley, and was obliged to assume a disinclination for seeing it. She must have known that she was tired of great houses. After going over so many, she really had no pleasure in fine carpets and cin- cintes, satin um, uh, curtains. Mrs. Gardner abused her stupidity. "If it were merely a fine house, richly furnished," said she, "I should not care about it myself, but the grounds are delightful. They have some of the finest woods in the country." Elizabeth said no more, but her mind could not let me look at this word, coincide. I think it's coincide, something like that. No. Acquiesce. Her mind could not acquiesce. The possibility of meeting Mr. Darcy while viewing the place instantly occurred. It would be dreadful. She blushed at the very idea, and thought it would be better to speak openly to her aunt than to run such a risk. But against this there were objections, and she finally resolved that it could be the last resource if her private enquiries as to the absence of the family were unfavourably answered. Accordingly, when she retired at 9, she asked the chambermaid whether uh, Pemberley were not a very fine place. What was the name of its protector? Protector, and with no little alarm, which the family were down for the summer. A most welcome negative followed the last question, and her alarms were now removed. She was at leisure to feel a great deal of curiosity to see the house herself, and when the subject was revived the next morning, and she was again applied to, could readily answer, and with a proper air of indifference, that she had not really any dislike to the scheme. To Pemberley, therefore, they were to go. End of the second volume. Yeah, end of volume 2. Yeah, wow, I'm done with volume 2. I like it. I'm gonna read volume 3 tomorrow. Yeah, I'm almost done. I think this is like the last volume. If I'm sure, this is probably the last volume. Yeah, I think it's probably the last volume. I can't wait to read this, and then I'll be done. I think I'll be done with it very soon. Yeah, yeah, I can't wait. And I'm so proud of myself for reading this. I'm gonna come back tomorrow. Yeah. And thank you so much. I'm gonna read the next chapter tomorrow. Yeah. Thank you so much for watching this video. Have a nice day. Bye bye.